I turned off the highway and onto a gravel road that wound its way into the thick forest. The incline was slight, but my old Honda groaned with the effort, tires crunching as the trees grew closer on both sides, forming a narrow tunnel of towering green. After a few more minutes, I came to a small clearing with a wooden trail marker and nothing else. No people, no other cars, just gravel and weathered signs. Perfect. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed felt like a blessing. After days of road noise and fast food drive-thrus, I sat for a minute, letting the stillness settle. 3 days on the road from Phoenix had left me stiff and hollow. The parking area wasn't much, just a patch of gravel and a couple of faded signs, warning about trail safety and registration. It was exactly what I needed. I'd chosen this remote access point in Olympic National Forest for its isolation, and it delivered. Wednesday morning, no crowds, no noise. I opened the door and stepped out into air that felt like it belonged to a different world. Moist, cool, alive. The sharp, earthy scent of moss and pine hit me instantly, washing away the taste of dry desert air that had clung to me for months. Phoenix already felt like a dream. A dry, scorching, suburban dream full of divorce lawyers and fast food wrappers. I rolled my shoulders to loosen the knots from cheap motel beds and long hours behind the wheel. In the glove compartment, the divorce papers were still folded, the ink barely dry. I'd thought about throwing them away somewhere along the Oregon border, but instead I'd kept them, not because I cared to remember, but because I needed proof that part of my life was truly over. I popped the trunk and pulled out my hiking pack, worn but reliable. It had carried me through trails in Washington, Colorado, Montana, and now here. I checked the gear one last time: tent, sleeping bag, stove, food, first aid, water purifier, knife, flashlight, matches. Everything I'd need to vanish into the trees for a few days. The backpack's weight settled comfortably across my shoulders. The familiar ache of it grounded me more than anything had in weeks. I filled out my day-use permit at the wooden trailhead, scrawling 3-day solo, hike expected return, Friday, with a pen that barely worked in the cold air. Then I started walking. The Mount Sawtooth Trail began as a well-maintained dirt path, winding through massive Douglas firs spaced out like ancient columns. Moss covered everything: rocks, tree trunks, fallen logs, softening the landscape into something that looked almost surreal. The deeper I walked, the more the world beyond the trees faded away. No buzzing phones, no paperwork, no arguments over who got the couch. Just me, the pack on my back, and the slow rhythm of my feet finding their pace. Left foot, right foot, pole plant, breathe. The tension I'd carried for months started to dissolve with each step. My thoughts quieted. My lungs expanded with damp, clean air that smelled like rain and earth. This was the escape I'd needed, not just from the city or the divorce, but from the version of myself that had come to feel unfamiliar. After about an hour, I'd made good progress. The trail climbed steadily but wasn't difficult, and I hadn't seen another soul. I passed a few clearings where campfires had once burned and rocks had been arranged into circles, but they looked cold and unused. The solitude was exactly what I'd wanted. My shoulders loosened, my breath steadied, my head cleared. Then, as I reached a higher ridge and paused to sip water, I realized the forest had gone completely silent. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, maybe I'd just tuned out the background sounds in my focus. But no, the silence was real. No birds, No rustling leaves, not even the hum of insects. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The air itself felt heavier, like it was pressing against my ears. A chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the altitude. I scanned the woods around me. Massive trunks stretched skyward. Shadows pooled between them. Nothing moved. I unscrewed the cap on my water bottle, and the sound seemed too loud, like it didn't belong. I clipped it back on, and the metallic click echoed like a hammer on steel. The silence was wrong. Unnatural. I tried to rationalize maybe it was atmospheric pressure or moss-absorbing sound, but it felt deeper than that. Like the forest itself was holding its breath. I kept walking, more slowly now, my focus sharpened. By the quiet, every footstep seemed to announce itself. I felt exposed, watched. Still, I kept moving until the trail curved around a massive fallen log that cut across a clearing. I adjusted my pack and looked ahead, then froze. A man was walking toward me, maybe 30 yards away, moving steadily down the trail. He looked like a hiker in his 40s, dark hair, pale skin, too pale. His clothing was normal boots, khaki pants, lightweight jacket, but he wasn't carrying a pack. No gear, no water, no poles. As he got closer, I noticed something else. He wasn't smiling. Hikers usually offered a nod or a quick hello. This man didn't. He just stared. His eyes were dark, unreadable, scanning my face and gear like he was studying me. We met near the log. I stepped aside. "Hello," I said. "Hello," he replied. He didn't keep walking, just stopped and kept staring. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately. "Beautiful day for hiking," I said. He didn't respond. "Where are you headed?" he asked flatly. "Sunset Ridge," I replied. He nodded, too slowly. "Been there earlier. Good spot." His phrasing felt off. If he'd already been, why was he coming from the wrong direction? "You hiking alone?" he asked. My stomach clenched. "Yeah, you. Just me." Silence. Then he stepped aside. I passed close enough to smell him metallic, sharp, like old blood. I walked on without looking back, heart pounding, when I finally did glance over my shoulder. The trail was empty, but that metallic smell still lingered in the air. There had been something deeply unnatural about the way the pale man had looked at me, like he was assessing something specific, not just seeing me in passing, but evaluating me in a way that triggered every warning bell in my body. I tried to chalk it up to stress, to the mental fatigue of a bitter divorce and long isolation, to a wandering imagination fueled by too many days on the road and not enough sleep. But no matter how many rational excuses I tried to stack up, none of them could suppress the growing, relentless sense that something was very wrong in these woods. I pushed forward harder, climbing fast, wanting to reach Sunset Ridge before the light faded entirely. The higher I went, the darker the forest seemed to become, even though the sun wasn't gone yet. The straps of my pack dug into my shoulders, but I didn't stop. Reaching the ridge, setting up camp, getting a fire going, those became the only things that mattered. I needed a boundary between me and whatever felt like it was creeping up behind me with every step. The trees finally opened up into a familiar clearing. I remembered this place from 5 years ago. The same stone fire ring, the same towering firs surrounding the spot in a protective ring. I chose the biggest tree at the edge of the clearing and dropped my pack beside it, setting up camp with practiced, mechanical movements. Tent staked, rainfly secured, sleeping bag unrolled. The physical activity gave me a small sense of control, something solid to focus on. But that suffocating silence never lifted. No birds, no wind, no rustling. Leaves, just an oppressive, vacuum-sealed hush that made even the lightest sound feel amplified. I tried to listen past it, hoping for the hum of insects or the rustle of some small creature. But the quiet was total and absolute. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else, something watching, something waiting. I pulled out my camp stove and lit a small flame to heat water for dinner. The soft hiss of gas felt unnaturally loud. I kept scanning the tree line while my meal cooked, stomach tight, muscles tense. I made myself eat even though the food tasted like ash. I needed the calories. I had no idea what the night would bring. When darkness finally fell, it came fast and complete. My headlamp's beam was a narrow bubble of visibility in a sea of black. I moved methodically, hanging my food, storing anything scented, securing the site. I'd done this on countless trails before, but this time, my hands trembled with every motion. I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut, the noise slicing through the silence like a scream. Inside, I pulled my hunting knife from the side pocket and slid it under my pillow, the handle warm against my palm. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I lay still, heart pounding, eyes open in the dark. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I waited for any sound, any sign of normalcy, but nothing came. Then, at some point deep into the night, I heard them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, careful footsteps on the pine-covered forest floor. They were maybe 10 feet from my head, measured and soft, as if whoever or whatever was out there was placing each step with precision. I froze, my hand gripping the knife, breath held. The steps circled the tent, passing behind it, moving toward the fire ring, then around again. And with them came that same metallic smell, faint at first, then stronger, sharp, like blood and rust. It flooded the tent, soaked into my nose and mouth, until I could taste it on my tongue. The steps paused just outside the tent door. I could hear breathing slow, steady inhalations and exhalations that didn't sound quite human, too mechanical, too intentional. Then the steps moved again, around the fire ring, around the tree line, repeating over and over. 4 or 5 times, maybe more. I lost count. Each pass brought the smell closer, thicker, more suffocating. I pressed my face into the sleeping bag to keep from gagging. I didn't move, not an inch. Whoever was out there wanted me to hear them. They were making sure I knew they were there. Eventually, the steps faded. The smell began to thin, but I stayed frozen in place, counting my breaths, trying to convince myself it was over. My heart pounded against my ribs like a hammer. Sweat soaked through my clothes. I didn't sleep. I stared at the roof of the tent until the first gray light bled through the nylon fabric. Every muscle ached from staying so still. Every sound I made shifting in my bag, cracking joints, breathing felt dangerous. When the sun had finally started to rise, I sat up and began packing. I wasn't staying another night. I moved with urgent efficiency, cramming everything into my pack in reverse order. Tent collapsed in minutes, gear stowed, food sealed. I did. One final sweep of the campsite. That's when I saw them footprints beside the fire ring. Fresh, crisp, recent. But not just any prints. They matched mine exactly. Same size, same tread, same unique wear on the left heel from years of hiking. Perfect copies of the steps I'd taken the day before when setting up camp. but I hadn't walked that path since I knelt to examine them. They were undeniable. Something had walked in my footsteps. Something or someone had mimicked me perfectly, down to the smallest detail. Whoever had made those tracks had done more than follow me that had mirrored me, step for step, angle for angle, the way my right foot always turned slightly outward, the exact stride length. Even where I'd hesitated or shifted weight, everything had been copied. As I stood tracing the double set of boot prints that stretched ahead of me, a slow, icy dread flooded my stomach. The two sets of footprints ran side by side, beginning from the fire ring and continuing toward the tree line, the exact route I'd taken when I first arrived, like someone had been walking next to me, invisible the entire time. My breath came faster the farther I followed them, heart thudding louder than it should in such a quiet place. The prints didn't stop at the edge of the clearing. They kept going, parallel and identical, all the way to the trail. I remembered that spot well. That's where I'd seen him, the pale man, where he'd stood too still, watching me without blinking, saying nothing. That second set of tracks had started right where he'd been standing. He must have followed me from that moment on, copying me with uncanny precision, studying me in ways I hadn't understood until now. I'd thought I was hiking alone, but every move I'd made had been shadowed. While I was climbing up to Sunset Ridge, he was just a few yards behind me, matching my pace, learning my rhythm, wearing my path into the earth. And while I lay in my tent, locked in panic, he'd walked slow circles around me in the dark, breathing unnaturally, leaving behind that awful, coppery stench. The realization crushed me with a fresh wave of fear. My body tensed. I turned and scanned the surrounding trees, certain I'd catch a glimpse of him watching me again. But the forest stood still, unmoving, and so silent it felt fake. I hoisted my pack and started moving down the trail. The walk became a jog almost immediately. I had to get out. I had to get away from this place. Each footfall echoed in the stillness like gunshots. I thought I heard matching steps behind Meegs, matching like something was still mirroring my movement. But every time I turned, nothing was there. Just empty trail, deep woods, and endless silence pressing in like a smothering blanket. My eyes kept catching on shapes in the shadows, thinking they were faces. Every boulder, every patch of tree bark looked like it might move, might blink. The smell returned, faint at first, then stronger as I descended, metallic and wet. It felt like it coated the inside of my mouth, like it had seeped into my lungs. I ran harder. My legs burned, lungs heaving in the cool air, but I didn't stop. My brain screamed at me to go faster. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone since the moment I met him. I knew now that something was hunting me, and that this forest wasn't a place where the normal rules of life and death applied. The memory of the identical footprints haunted me, each one a perfect replica of mine, like the forest itself had tried to duplicate me. After nearly an hour of running, I slowed when something unfamiliar came into view. Ahead, through the trees, stood an oak unusual among the evergreens that dominated this mountain. A thick, low branch stretched out over the trail, and something hung from it. At first I thought it was just gear, maybe a bear bag or someone's backpack left behind. But then the shape resolved. It was heavy, human-sized, swaying gently in the still air. The smell intensified as I approached my metallic, but now laced with rot, organic. Wrong, my feet moved on their own. Step by step, I closed the distance, until the shape became fully visible. A rope, a body. Someone had hung from that tree. It wasn't just anyone, it was me. My own face stared down at me, slack-jawed and lifeless, neck twisted, skin graying with the bloating of early decay. The jacket, the pants, even the tear in the left sleeve, was all identical to what I was wearing, down to the smallest detail. My boots, the same pair, with the worn spot on the left heel, the same faded cap on the head. I stumbled back, legs barely able to hold me. My mind reeled. How could I be looking at myself? That was my face, my body rotting in the morning light. The smell was overwhelming now, sweet and foul and metallic all at once. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve, but the stink clung to everything, penetrating deep into my nose and throat. I backed away, dizzy, and reached for a tree to steady myself. But my hand passed right through it. There was no resistance, no surface, just air. My fingers grasped nothing. The forest shimmered, wavering like a heat mirage, and I realized my vision was collapsing inward. I couldn't breathe. My legs buckled. I dropped to the trail, landing hard, my gear rattling. In my pack. As I lay there, I kept staring up at the body in the tree, the exact copy of me, dangling lifeless and swaying in the wind. I didn't understand how this could be possible. I was alive, I was conscious, but that was undeniably my corpse, and something in the air, in the smell, in the silence, confirmed it. I tried to think clearly, but it was impossible. The last thing I saw before I passed out was my dead self's eyes shifting just slightly but enough to make contact with mine. They moved, cloudy and pale, but watching, following me as I lost consciousness. When I came to, the taste of blood and copper was still thick on my tongue. My cheek was pressed into cold, damp pine needles. I pushed myself up, heart still pounding. The tree stood above me, branches empty. No rope, no body. No evidence that anything had ever been there. I scrambled to my feet, legs unsteady, hands trembling. My gear had spilled, so I gathered what I could and looked around again. Nothing. The bark on the tree was unmarked. No scuff where a rope should have rubbed, no disturbed leaves beneath it. The forest floor looked untouched, just as it had the day I arrived, but the metallic odor still lingered faintly in the air, like a scent burned into my memory. The silence remained absolute, deeper than before. Not even the wind moved through the trees. I didn't know what I'd seen, but it felt real, too. Real, the face, the eyes, the smell. The impossible weight of my own body swaying above me. Nothing in this forest was right. Not the silence, not the shadows, not even me. I shouldered my pack and made sure everything was strapped down tight. Whatever was happening, whether I was unraveling mentally or something truly unnatural was happening, I knew I had to get out of those woods before things got worse. The parking area was only a couple miles away. My Honda was there, keys in my pocket, engine waiting to carry me back to a world that made sense. A world where corpses didn't hang from trees with your own face, and strangers didn't mimic your voice like a reflection with teeth. I set off at a brisk pace, quickly picking up speed as the silence around me deepened. Every bootstep sounded unnaturally loud on the compacted trail, echoing through the towering trees that loomed like sentinels on either side. The trail narrowed in places, branches snapping at my face, leaving angry red scratches as I forced my way through. The pack on my back thumped with every stride, heavier than it had any right to be. Each jolt reminding me of the night I'd spent shaking with fear and the minutes I'd lost unconscious on the forest floor. I'd only gone a short way when I heard them footsteps behind me. Not random sounds or wildlife crunching leaves, but perfectly timed, echoing mine step for step. They were impossibly precise. I stopped and turned quickly, hoping it was just another early hiker or maybe someone from a nearby camp. But what I saw froze every muscle in my body. There he was, the pale man, 30 yards back, moving between the trees with that same calm, measured gait, unhurried, deliberate. His movements were unnaturally smooth, like something wearing a human skin, without understanding how to use it. Up close, he was worse than I remembered. His face looked synthetic, almost waxy, like a mannequin left too long in the sun. His skin gleamed with an unnatural sheen, tight over the angles of his skull. His eyes were no longer just dark. They were voids, bottomless, pure black pits that seemed to drink in the light and reflect nothing back. And when he smiled, his teeth looked off to white, too sharp, not meant for a human mouth. Then came the smell, thick and choking. That familiar metallic sting now mingled with something wet and rotten, like spoiled meat. It filled my nose and coated my tongue. I could taste it, feel it slithering into my lungs. And when he finally spoke, the voice that emerged wasn't his, it was mine. Perfectly mimicked. My inflection, my rasp, my exact voice, like someone playing a recording of my own words. He said, "You shouldn't have come here." It hit like ice water down my spine. This thing hadn't just watched MIT, had studied me, learned me, memorized me. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, full speed, not looking back. I plowed through brush and branches, leaped over logs, slid down slopes slick with pine needles. My gear banged and rattled in my pack, straps biting into my shoulders. But I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I had to reach the car. I had to get out. Behind me there was nothing. No sound of pursuit, no crashing footfalls, just an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl, that made it worse. The absence of sound told me it was still back there, moving like a ghost, without weight or presence. Closing the gap without a whisper. I could feel it pressing closer with each step, watching, matching me. The trail curved sharply around a massive tree, and I nearly lost my footing. I slammed a hand against the cold bark to steady myself and stole a glance behind. Empty trail. Empty forest, no sign of him, but the smell was still there, thick and wrong. I didn't stop to question it. I kept running. Finally, the trees opened up. The gravel lot appeared through the last fringe of pines, like a gift from the heavens. My Honda sat just where I'd left it, ordinary and beautiful in its blandness. My legs threatened to give out as I reached it. I fumbled in my jacket for the keys, hands trembling too hard to grab them on the first try. They slipped, hit the gravel, bounced under the car. I dropped to my knees, scraping at stones, feeling panic rise in my throat like bile. I found them, stood up, dropped them again. On the third try, I got the key in the door and flung it open. As I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced toward. The tree linen saw him again, standing motionless, just inside the shadow of the trees, as though he'd never moved at all. He hadn't chased me. He hadn't needed to. He just watched. Glowing faintly against the bark, those black, empty eyes locked on mine, unmoving, unblinking. The engine turned over immediately. The sound was miraculous, familiar and solid and real. I slammed the car into reverse, tires kicking gravel, and then into drive. The Honda lurched forward as I floored it. I didn't slow until the narrow access road gave way to highway. In the rearview mirror, he was still there, standing, watching, shrinking into the distance, but he never moved. My hands clutched the wheel with white-knuckled grip, fingers aching, joints stiff. I kept driving. The trees gave way to farmland, then to traffic. Other cars, normal people, life. I finally pulled off at a gas station just outside Olympia. People were walking around, buying snacks, talking on their phones. I sat in my car, staring through the windshield, trying to figure out how to make sense of it all. The divorce papers were still in the glove box. I pulled them out and stared at the text, the bland, legal jargon. 3 days ago, they were my biggest worry. Now they felt almost comforting. I could understand them. They belonged to a world with rules. A world where things made sense. I bought a coffee. It tasted like it should, hot and bitter. No hint of death or decay. Outside, people argued with their kids, cleaned bugs off their windshields, filled their tanks. I called my brother. He answered cheerfully, asked about the trip. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain the unexplainable, but couldn't find the words. I heard myself say, "It's good. Beautiful country up here. Really peaceful." That's what I told my brother when he picked up, and we stuck to easy conversation for the next 10 minutes. He told me about his kids. I mentioned job prospects in Portland, and we shared updates on our parents' summer plans. It was the kind of normal, surface-level conversation you can only have with someone who has no idea how close you came to something that might not even belong to this world. He didn't ask why my voice sounded hollow, or why I was calling from a gas station and not the trailhead. I didn't explain why I'd ended the trip early or mention the nightmare that had followed me down the mountain. When I ended the call, I realized I'd already made my decision without saying it out loud. Whatever had happened to me out there in the forest was staying in the forest. I wasn't going to tell anyone. I wasn't going to try to convince park rangers or strangers online that something had mimicked my voice and watched me run for my life. I wasn't going to post about it in paranormal forums or report it to anyone who might put it in a folder labeled hallucinations. I was going to drive to Portland, start the job I had lined up, and pretend the trip had been just as peaceful as I'd described. Whatever haunted those woods could stay there forever. I wanted nothing more to do with it, but pretending something didn't happen doesn't erase it. I moved into a small studio on the east side of Portland, furnished it with the bare essentials of futon, a wobbly desk from IKEA, a coffee table cluttered with takeout containers and empty cans. I told myself I was rebuilding, starting fresh. But the truth was, I hadn't stopped thinking about it. I kept searching. Late at night, eyes burning from screen glow, I'd refresh the same forums again and again, typing in Olympic National Forest encounters for the 100th time. The wall beside my desk filled slowly with printouts and red-ink connections between stories that mirrored mine a little too closely. There were hikers who saw their reflections, walking toward them. People who found footprints around their tents that matched their boots perfectly. A woman who saw her own body hanging from a tree and woke up miles away, no memory of how she'd gotten there. Every story mentioned the same silence, the same smell of metal and rot, the same sense of being watched by something that moved without a sound. The worst ones were the people who said they weren't sure they'd ever left the forest at all, that something else had. One post stood out. A user who claimed to work for the park service user, name forest_guard_artificial, wrote that these incidents clustered around specific times and places, that management classified them as psychological events caused by solitude, and quietly discouraged solo hiking in those areas. I screenshotted it before it could disappear, added it to the growing collection of evidence that no one in authority was ever going to say what they knew. My work phone buzzed. A message from my project manager asking if I could stay late tomorrow to finish debugging a payment module. I typed back sure before thinking. More hours at work meant fewer hours in this apartment with my thoughts. Cascade software had been my salvation these past 6 months. Programming was safe, logical, predictable. Every function had an outcome. Every bug had a cause. When I was buried in code, I couldn't think about sharp smiles or voices that sounded like mine. I was working 60 hours a week and everyone thought I was ambitious. But I was really just afraid to be alone with what I remembered. Even then, I couldn't stop checking the forum. New posts appeared every few days. People describing experiences in the forest with clinical precision, questioning their sanity, describing encounters with things that shouldn't exist. I'd tried therapy, too. 3 weeks with Dr. Morrison, explaining what I'd seen while she nodded and jotted down notes about stress, isolation, and trauma. When I described the body in the tree, she called it symbolic. When I mentioned the pale man, she said, the brain externalizes fear. It all made rational sense. If you'd never smelled that metallic rot in the back of your throat, or heard your own voice come out of something else's mouth. After 3 sessions, I stopped going. She hadn't been there. She hadn't lived it. Her answers felt like explanations meant to cover everything, even the things that didn't fit. I removed every mirror from my apartment, except one small one in the bathroom, tilted just enough, so I could shave without ever locking eyes with my reflection. The nightmares had stopped, replaced by insomnia and the constant feeling that something was still watching. I added more locks to the door, blackout curtains to the windows. My hiking boots and camping gear were stuffed into a trash bag in the closet, tagged for donation but never taken out. I couldn't bring myself to give them to someone else. I couldn't let them wear those boots into the wrong place. I avoided parks. Even a few trees in a city square would make my skin crawl. I got my groceries delivered, took Ubers to work, turned down every invitation that involved the outdoors. My co-workers thought I was a shut-in or a workaholic. They didn't know I couldn't risk going near the woods again that night. As I scrolled through the forums again, a new post appeared. No previous activity, no avatar, just a timestamp and a single paragraph. To the hiker who escaped from Sunset Ridge 6 months ago, you left something behind. It's been waiting for you to come back and claim it. The oak tree remembers what hung there, and so do the footprints that circle it every night. Some doors can't be closed once they've been opened. Some debts can't be ignored forever. The forest knows where you live now. I slammed the laptop shut. The screen cracked. My chest tightened as the room seemed to close in. I had convinced myself that driving away had been enough. That distance and time would keep it behind me. But what if I'd never actually made it out? What if all of this, my job, this apartment, this whole life was just the last dream of someone whose body still swung from a rope in the woods while something else lived in his skin? I walked to the bathroom and forced myself to look. The face in the mirror looked right. Same brown eyes, same scar on my chin. But how could I trust it? How could I be sure this was still me? I pressed my fingers to the mirror and watched my reflection do the same. Perfectly synced, perfectly normal. But standing there, surrounded by a life I didn't trust, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had never left the forest. That I was still there, hanging, watching, waiting.